All right, welcome back to Surviving Paradise, the podcast that takes a sometimes serious, oftentimes humorous look at the claim by Jehovah's Witnesses and their governing body that they're living in a modern day spiritual paradise. I am your host, Stacy Bauman, former elder, ministerial servant, and a kid raised in Jehovah's Witnesses from the age of 4 through the 70s and 80s. And as always, just know that there may be things within our episode that trigger some of those deep scars and wounds that are caused by Jehovah's Witnesses. If you are an ex Jehovah's Witness who is listening in, or perhaps one that's in Jehovah's Witnesses and exploring, we have nothing but respect for you. Hope you'll stay, have some laughs, have some cries. We're all in it to win it, so to speak, but we feature lots of sarcasm, humor, and never meant to offend. So I want to jump right in this week and start tackling a subject that has troubled me from the time I was a kid. And even as an adult, I guess by now I have somewhat healed on this issue and I kind of laugh at it a little bit, as you will probably no doubt hear. But I want to take a look at this issue of Jehovah's character, the Jehovah that we were raised around, so to speak. If you're a longtime Jehovah's Witness, the Jehovah that we're taught is very real and interested in us on an intimate level. And just take a look at Jehovah's character as painted and created by the governing body. Now, several weeks ago, we covered the subject of universal sovereignty, a fun episode for me personally, as it's a subject that has always drove me nuts. And I guess somewhat within the time period or that episode, it gave us a peek into Jehovah's judgment, his decision making. He, in a nutshell, I encourage you to go listen to it if you're at all interested, but he allows a bully to run loose and torture his kids just to be sure his name looks good in the neighborhood. By extension, the universe. He apparently gave Satan control over weather patterns so he could blow houses down on Job's kids. He gave Satan access to his house in heaven until 1914. And we're all suffering with life's challenges while the two of them, Jehovah and Satan, watch on and give each other major league noogies. I'm showing my age there with that stupid word. Okay, but we're going to have some fun. But in all of this, the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, clearly not too bright themselves, never seem to consider the discrepancies or how they built the character of Jehovah or how he makes decisions. Now, at the outset, this may sound like I'm picking on the Bible or the Bible narrative. And to be honest, it's kind of unavoidable in many ways. So if you're a Bible listener, or excuse me, reader, and you still hold the Bible in high regard, I certainly respect that. Not meant to offend. I think it is a valuable book, though not on the level, obviously, that Jehovah's Witnesses or one of 10,000 religions across this planet do. But it's almost unavoidable. And I'm not picking on the Bible per se as a book, but I'm more interested in how the 8 guys in upstate New York have addressed some really glaring and obvious issues with Jehovah as a person or a character, as well as Jehovah's judgment. And since those guys boldly claim that they alone are his mouthpiece to all of mankind, that seems a little odd to me. I mean, if someone talks trash about your father or your family, how do you typically react to that? But the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses hasn't done anything really to shield the world from what are some pretty suspect character traits by the Jehovah of the Bible, as they like to paint him. So I want to take this time to take a limited look, take a snapshot, take a few examples that have always bothered me or made me laugh or sent me into a sleepless night as I tried to untangle it as a kid. I want to take a limited look at Jehovah's character and how that character and all that it implies impacts and affects Jehovah's Witnesses, of which they claim there are millions. The governing body and the old timers will certainly recognize this phrase or these phrases or these claims. The governing body when I was a kid, and you learn it very, very young as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, claim that Jehovah has four main character traits. Are you with me, old timers or people my age? And if you're a younger person who's left or in, I'd be curious to know if they still teach this. But they claim that Jehovah as a person has four main pillars to his personality, his character, and they are love, justice, wisdom, and power. And I'm here to tell you that they've created a psychopath. And I am sorry. I'm going to be blunt and cut to the chase in the interest of time. Jehovah, as a person, from the pages of the Bible and by extension by those glorious 8 guys in upstate New York, have created a psychopath. And it's almost undeniable, depending on who you talk to. So let's take a deep dive. And I want to go back to the beginning. Isn't that cute? In the beginning, let's take a look at Jehovah's very first decision, our very first peek into the God of Jehovah's Witnesses. And just note that, as I often do on the show, I give you a snapshot into a very overactive mind and imagination, and it is mine. As a kid, I was this way, and certainly as I grew up, became appointed as an elder, this kind of stuff impacted what I did as a Jehovah's Witness and how I thought and how I treated other people. Although I leaned very heavily on the New Testament and Jesus' example, and we'll get into that, you can't deny the way the Bible paints Jehovah of Jehovah's Witnesses. So let's look at his first decision. Genesis chapter 1, verses 4 and 5, in the beginning, and I mean the beginning, cute play on words. Genesis 1, 4, and 5 tells us this, quote, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and desolate, and there was darkness upon the surface of the watery deep. And God's active force was moving about over the surface of the waters. And God said, 'Let there be light.' Then there was light. After that, God saw that the light was good, and God began to divide the light from the darkness. God called the light day, but the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, a first day." End quote. So here goes that journey into my distorted childlike mind that follows me today. I always found it interesting that Jehovah and his character hit us in the face within 2 to 3 verses of the Bible. It literally shows and gives us a snapshot, and there's not a lot of details. I won't go into all the stand-up routines on this. It's hard to not borrow from them. But God describes his adjustment of the Earth's rotation speed so that the length of the day and night would be correct to permit the sustenance of life, human beings, people. It appears that he may have also adjusted the tilt of the Earth's axis to cause seasons to occur. So he is clearly very, very invested in mankind living a good life, being safe, having light, having day, having seasons. So from the beginning, though, my mind always went to we start to see a pattern we can't quite explain. We have Jehovah making judgment calls on what would be best for his kids here on the earth. Never mind, and I desperately want to go there but won't, that he apparently created the heavens and the earth in pitch black darkness, according to this narrative. He made a judgment call on adjusting the planet. Never mind that at the same time, he apparently decided his personal touch was needed to ensure our great life on this planet. He also apparently decided to ignore things like earthquakes, tornadoes, and hurricanes. They passed the test, and he left those into our life experience here on this planet. So again, from the beginning, in just a couple of verses on this subject of looking at Jehovah's character as painted by the pages of the Bible, but by extension, the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, we start to see a pattern that no one can explain. But leave it up to the 8 guys in upstate New York and billions of pages of literature to give it a try. And they fail on every front. And it impacts Jehovah's Witnesses in the way they think. Here is where the rub begins when it comes to examining Jehovah's character, his decision making, his motives. The governing body like to tell us that he is love, justice, wisdom, and power, but that he is primarily love. You might remember, if you've been around long enough, in 2002, they published the book Draw Close to Jehovah. And I'm going to confess right here and now, at that time I was still a witness. Little did I know I would exit just a few years later. But at that time, I loved that book. Not going to lie. I thought it was the best book they ever made. And it was an interesting time in the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society's history, in that you could see them softening on some things, including college, including dating, including blood fractions. But they really started to lean into Jehovah as a God of love in 2002 with this book. I conducted it in the book study. I read it. It was really what drew me and kept me as a Jehovah's Witness, this idea that Jehovah was really loving. You remember the cover back or front had him holding a lamb. In fact, I have a story on that down the line. There's a teaser for a future episode. But it didn't add up. That's the entire problem with this. And the governing body tries to get millions of people to believe that the Jehovah of the Bible is this loving, high character, all wise, full of justice God. And I want to take a look at a few examples that leave people with a headache, trying to figure out why and how that matches with the Jehovah of the Bible. And why I make the blunt statement that Jehovah is closer to a psychopath than a loving, kind God watching over his millions of witnesses here on planet Earth. And I want to start with what I think is the brain-bending foundation of everything when it comes to Jehovah's character, when it comes to putting his decision-making under a microscope, when it comes to his poor judgment. You name it, it all falls under this umbrella. And that brain-bending foundation is this. Brain-bending, excuse me, bounding, same difference. The character of Jehovah, as painted by the Bible and the governing body in the Old Testament, versus the character of Jehovah as found in the Bible and painted by the governing body in the New Testament, and how the governing body works itself in knots to try to explain it and leverage it to control millions of Jehovah's Witnesses in every aspect of their life. Let's get this out of the way right from the beginning. The God of love, those four main qualities, the Jehovah of the Old Testament, has no problem killing people. He's got no problem. Never mind that he created day and night and gave us days, and then bizarrely left natural disasters and earthquakes as part of the human experience. It goes well beyond that in the Old Testament. The God of love, Jehovah, has no problem killing people, and I mean lots of them. It's going to be the subject for a future episode, and I'm going to go really deep on this one, and I'm just going to warn you, it's going to be filled with laughs. But there are several books written about this. One scholar or author estimates that just examining the Bible as a whole will show you that Jehovah kills upwards of 25 million people in the pages of the Bible. As for that guy that he's fighting against, that bully, Satan the devil, 10. 10 people die at the hands of Satan that we can count in the scriptures of the Bible. Jehovah, possible upwards of 25 million. Can't wait to unpack that one in the future. But again, let's stay focused on his character. And just a couple of examples for now that require the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses to create quite the spin job on Jehovah, the God of love. And they seem to almost push to the background that whole justice, wisdom, and power thing for now. Keep in mind, they want us to believe that the God of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society was sure to record in this book, the Bible, the following examples that I'm going to lob at you. It's not like the governing body did this. They want us to believe Jehovah, in his incredible character, wanted to be sure that you and I and people throughout millenniums of time, because again, the end hasn't shown up yet, folks. He wanted to be sure that we knew this about him, that this was the warm photo album of him as a person or a character that we were all supposed to be drawn to. So, despite the fact that he likes killing people by the bushels, hundreds, thousands, millions, let's take a look at just some of the more interesting nuances of Jehovah's character that impacted Jehovah's Witness today. Okay, the flood. Look, we've covered this one, but I'm sure that a big part of that estimated 25 million is probably summed up in the flood. A few million folks there, including babies and puppies. The whole earth gets to drown instead of Jehovah, in his infinite wisdom, one of his four qualities, doesn't just take out the bad guys, make them disappear, vaporize, fall down and die. Whatever he could have done as the creator, he instead decided to drown everything on the planet. See past episode if interested. But how about the plagues of Egypt? An example I always found very interesting, and just one tidbit among many in this account. Take a look at Exodus chapter 12 and verse 29. This one's interesting to me. It was as a kid. And again, I was a big reader as a kid in the 70s. So I would read and contemplate, read and contemplate. I realize we're all different, but a snapshot into my head. Exodus 12:29 says, quote, "Then at midnight, Jehovah struck down every firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who was sitting on his throne, to the firstborn of the captive who was in the prison, and every firstborn of the animals." End quote. What the hell exactly did some guys in prison who have kids, what did their kids do to deserve to die if they were the firstborn? What did the firstborn of the animals do to deserve to be killed by Jehovah, the God of love, in his infinite and wise character? A picture given to us by the governing body in the Bible. As a kid, I would sit there going, what? Why did he kill the firstborn sheep or goats or dogs, or what did they do? Did they have any idea why they were getting killed? And you're a kid whose mom or dad had gotten locked in an Egyptian prison. You already have a miserable life. You're probably going without. You're likely living in poverty among the population of Egyptians. And suddenly you drop dead. Why exactly? These are the things that you look at Jehovah and go, what an interesting snapshot on the character of this God of love. And thank you, governing body, for making sure to make dramas, books, publications, magazines that highlight this unbelievable loving act by Jehovah God. But in what I think is a truly top 10 stunning example of Jehovah's questionable judgment and character, and one that they roll out to Jehovah's Witnesses when they make decisions in 2022. Look no further than, again, early on in the book or photo album Jehovah compiled for us to give a snapshot of his character to. Genesis chapter 18, verses 16 through 33, where you will find the account of an imperfect human like you and I listening to this podcast, a guy named Abraham, plays a somewhat critical role in world's religions outside of Jews, Christians, might even throw in Muslims. We find Abram, and then as his name came to be known, Abraham, literally trying to talk common sense and compassion and empathy with, Jehovah of the Bible, his creator. Imagine that an imperfect human can arrive at a few conclusions and try to reason with the creator of all things, the guy at the outset that created that day and night thing. And no, I'm not kidding. Again, from a young age to an adult who had to build entire public talks around subjects like this, I had to put together in my head how this worked. As the story goes, Jehovah intends to burn Sodom and by extension Gomorrah to the ground, including everybody inside the city, because apparently every man, woman, and child is truly evil. He's going to burn them all to the ground. And he makes this known in advance. Why? Not sure. Not a lot of details given. He makes this information available to Abraham, who then, as any of us would do, begs for the lives of innocent people in these cities that have no idea what's about to hit them. And the details surrounding this conversation give us a peek into a character I still can't wrap my head around, and save the bizarre reasonings that Jehovah's Witnesses and the governing body will give you. Abraham goes on to beg for the lives in this city in the Bible. He starts at 50 good people. How generous. Not sure how many were in the city, but he says, "Hey, Jehovah, you're my guy, you're my God, my father. If you can find 50, would it be possible to talk you into saving them?" The argument continues, folks. Abraham whittles Jehovah all the way down to 10 people. Look, if you could just find 10, would you be willing to save all these innocent people in this city who have no idea what's about to hit them? Jehovah agrees. And look, when I was a young guy, and it doesn't take much in this examination of character, I would lean back in my chair with my little yellow Bible story book. My feet couldn't touch the ground in the Kingdom Hall. And I would wonder, gosh, wouldn't he be willing to save him if there was just one? How about one really good guy? Like someone as good as Abraham that he's telling this story to, which I still can't wrap my head around. But God agrees. God agrees. Okay, if there's 10, Abraham, just for you, again, lots to unpack there, I'll save these cities. Now, as a kid, you're at a Jehovah's Witness in a Kingdom Hall, you're exposed to the New Testament, folks. You know probably more about Jesus than Abraham in most cases. So never mind that the New Testament Jehovah, same guy, same God, says that even the hairs of our heads are numbered, that not a bird falls to the ground without him knowing that, and we're far more precious than any of them, and that he's going to send his most precious guy, his most precious thing he loves more than anything, his own son, to die for us and save us. Same guy, if you're keeping score at home. Same God, same character as painted by the Bible and the governing body. So you, as a kid or as a Bible study among Jehovah's Witnesses, or just a baptized Jehovah's Witness who never thought about it before, lean back in your chair and think, what the hell is going on here? But none of it mattered in this account. He apparently couldn't even find 10 people in this city. So guess what? Sodom and Gomorrah and everybody in it is burnt to the ground, burnt to a crisp, like that fine burnt piece of toast on a Sunday as you make breakfast. He kills everyone and everything in sight after having this fascinating combo with Abraham. We're not sure why he told Abraham. Was he guilty and wanted to get Abraham's opinion on the matter? No one's entirely sure. You could read the account forward and backward, and it's one that's always stood out to me in reference to Jehovah's character. Like, what? First of all, why are you even going there? Let's kill everybody. But why are you sharing it with an imperfect guy on earth? I mean, I don't, go out in the backyard and see a ladybug and bend my knee and say, hey, I wanted to get your opinion on this big life decision I'm making. But isn't that essentially what God's doing here? Asking an imperfect life form well below him that he created, hey, should I burn all these people up? Abraham pleads, and result goes to the whole subject of this episode. God says, nah, I think I'll just kill them all. And I'll tell you, when I look at this example, funny enough, funny enough, as a kid, which I reference way too often here, but it just shows how young your brain can form and you start to have these questions. I always wondered how Abraham felt just 4 chapters later in the Bible a Bible the governing body pushes down the throats of Jehovah's Witnesses to this hour. Just 4 chapters later, Jehovah wants Abraham, after this interesting conversation on Sodom and Gomorrah, he tells Abraham to kill his own son. Hey, march him up to a mountain, tie him up, kill your only kid. I always wondered at that point if Abraham was thinking, what is it with this guy? What is it with this God of love, this God of justice, wisdom, and power? He wants me to march my own grown kid up to an altar and get him to agree to be tied up and killed? Nah, never mind. Never mind, folks. Abraham was a man of faith, I should say. He was a man of faith. So he checked his brain at the door, much the same way the governing body requires Jehovah's Witnesses to do today. When you enter the Kingdom Hall, just take your brain out, slide it into the mason jar. We'll put it in the coat room, and we're going to tell you how to live and how to think. And we're going to base it all on the actions, decisions, and characters of Jehovah God. There are so many examples that I could unpack here, but I think we're getting the picture. As I tend to do, I ramble because I just have this stream of thought or consciousness, and especially on matters of character and motive when it comes to anyone, imperfect humans, but certainly so in the case of the creator of all man, who works under such detail and intricacy that he can form DNA, that he can make sure in 1919, some guys in upstate New York at that time were miraculously chosen as the best of the best. So we have to take a close look at this. So to further the discussion, Jehovah's Witnesses constantly comment on Jehovah's character. They base their life on it. The 4 pillars of love, justice, wisdom, and power, those that are at least well-read or paying attention. And by extension, to extend this whole thought, this stream of consciousness, Jehovah's Witnesses are taught by the governing body that Jehovah is very interested and has direct counsel on things like who you surround yourself with, who you associate with. You learn this very early as a child at Jehovah's Witnesses. Bad associations spoil useful habits. We'll cover that down the road. But this all comes from Jehovah, the character that he is. He encourages us, that the governing body encourages Jehovah's Witnesses to look at what he does, base your decisions on what he does. And by extension, not just decisions like the ones we've talked about, but who you surround yourself with. Let's just take that as an example. It's such a big deal to guard who you associate with that the governing body will disfellowship people for talking to a family or a friend that just decides they don't want to be in this club anymore. They'll take life and death matters into their own hands based on this type of stuff. They claim that this all comes from Jehovah, his character, the God that he is, that his qualities of love, justice, wisdom, and power are what we should focus on. So consider that for a minute. Jehovah not only wants you to follow his example, but he even gets down into the weeds on who you surround yourself with. And I want to go through a couple of examples because it speaks to his character. They claim that he gives you the best of the best example by which you can make a decision as a Jehovah's Witness. Let's take it, association, who you surround yourself with. We already know from psychology that who we surround ourselves with rubs off on us. It impacts our lives. It influences us. So, of course, naturally, Jehovah would set the tone for this, right? Well, again, none of what I'm about to share with you seems to line up with the Jehovah we see in the first 39 books of his magical book called the Bible. Let's take a peek. Who does Jehovah and Jehovah's Witnesses by extension point to as to people we should emulate in matters of character, who we surround ourselves with, how we make decisions? I'm going to try to keep this brief, but again, stream of consciousness in a podcast episode. I'll give you one short example I'm not going to go deep on. Let's look at the man Lot. Now, we've talked about this before, and we'll likely talk about it again because it's so damning as to this subject matter of Jehovah, who he thinks we should see as men of faith, who who we should look to as the kind of people we should surround ourselves with. And if you don't, and you go a different route, you can be disfellowshipped. The man Lot, in a nutshell, a couple bullet points on this guy. You can read about him in the Bible book of Genesis. He, on one occasion, offers up his own daughters to be gang raped because the homosexual population in Sodom and Gomorrah, see a few minutes ago, comes to his door wanting the materialized angels who are in his house to come out so they can have sex with them. Lot doesn't come up with a different plan. No, he just says, "How about you take my daughters instead?" I'm sorry to be laughing. It's so sick and so absurd that I'm sorry, I laugh. But it doesn't stop there. Lot, this high character guy, much like his God Jehovah, who Abraham is just arguing with about this whole city, Lot decides to get hammered drunk. And then, well, as one does in modern society, in which we call a major disgusting crime, Lot decides to have sex with his own two daughters. I mean, what does one say about this? Jehovah again made sure that on matters of character, judgment, and the like, he wanted to make sure that in his photo album called the Bible, that this story somehow got in there. Not sure most families would include it in their family story or lineage. But Lot gets drunk, sleeps with his daughters. Uh, and the Bible and Jehovah himself and the governing body by extension prop this guy up as a great guy, a man of faith. I mean, why? We're never really sure on that one, by the way. We've got a couple real interesting and terrible and hideous stories. All we know about this guy is that he left Sodom, and apparently he had enough self-control to not turn around and watch the city burn like his wife did. And she became a salty, she was salty. We'll leave it at that. Let's move on from Lot. I mean, I feel like we could go an hour on Lot. Let's look at another guy that I have to confess I was always intrigued with, that Jehovah props up as high character, includes in the Bible, and that the governing body regularly roll out to Jehovah's Witnesses as someone that should be a shining example that they should look to in making decisions and basing their life on. This guy is known as King David. I'm going to do a whole episode on David because I simply can't resist. But to summarize, the Bible tells us, and Jehovah made sure to tell us, that he is, and I quote, a man after his own heart. Now, listen, in matters of David, again, full episode, but briefly, we all know about Bathsheba, the king who had dozens of beautiful women that he called wives, and he had concubines at his disposal. So he clearly, whether he was oversexed or not is another conversation, but he saw this woman bathing. Never mind the character issues we want to raise here, in that he is spying on a naked woman that isn't his wife. He apparently was stalking Bathsheba. He wanted her so bad, he had her husband killed. So now he's a murderer. He commits adultery with her. Some would argue by the Bible standards, we could call it rape. But then there's a baby that comes out of this very unfortunate episode of character. And Jehovah gives us a snapshot into his character. Here, he doesn't punish David. He has the baby killed. I've said too much about Jehovah and his willingness to kill babies and children. But in what is an ugly episode, the snapshot looks at Jehovah, but then David himself is mourning that the baby is sick. He knows Jehovah's plan for his innocent baby. He asks his servant, "Hey, has the baby died?" They say, "Unfortunately, it just did." David kind of gives us a proverbial shrug. He takes a bath, puts on some clean clothes, and asks for some grub. It's all in the Bible. Thank you, Jehovah, for giving us a snapshot into this conversation on character. But I've got one that has bothered me insanely since I was a kid. And oftentimes, for the most part, as a Jehovah's Witness, they don't talk a lot about it. There's not a lot of Watchtower articles on it. There's some. There's not a lot of public talks on it or dramas, incidentally. No video has been released as of yet. We're all waiting for the new complex to be built in upstate New York. But King David, as a character and held as someone that Jehovah says was after his own heart, goes on earlier from the Bathsheba disaster to commit a crime that is borderline more heinous. It's known in the Bible as the census sin. In a nutshell, David's going into battle and he wants to count his troops because he wants to make sure he wins this thing. That's it in a nutshell. I won't go deeper. The loving God, Jehovah, says, nah, I don't want you to count your troops. Rely on me. But David, as we do as crazy people, got insecure and he did it anyway. He counted his troops. Imagine that. He counted people. Jehovah goes on to get very angry, tells David he has sinned, and in one of the most damning character profiles and examples on Jehovah, the God of love in the Bible, he tells David, this is a sin I just can't overlook that you counted people. I'm going to give you a choice of 3 punishments for this bad decision. Here they are. You can choose between 3 years of famine, 3 months of fleeing from your enemies, or 3 days of plague. To review, the God of love can't overlook the counting sin. He says, I'll give you 3 years of starving. I'll give you 3 months of running, or I'll give you 3 days of disease. Thanks for trusting me, Jehovah. David says, let me think on this. Again, a sin I committed, a sin super grievous like counting people. David decides to choose on the 3rd. And Jehovah then says, okay, nice choice, 3 days of disease. He punishes David, not David actually, but the entire nation of Israel with a plague that kills 70,000 people in the territory. That's right. If you're keeping score, David counted some guys, very serious sin. Jehovah, in a snapshot of personality and character, gives David a choice on how to be punished. And David decides, well, how about I just let it go to all my people? Let's have them pay the price. Now, Jehovah's Witnesses explain this away as the first 2 choices left David in the hands of men. Very scary. They wouldn't be merciful. But the 3rd left him leaning on Jehovah, the high character God, and his mercy. To that, I've always said, nice try. It doesn't begin to explain some very real glaring problems with the personalities of these 2 people, not by significance the creator himself. For example, why did Jehovah give David a choice to begin with? Why didn't he say you can have diarrhea for 6 months because you counted people? Why didn't he say, you got to give me back a couple of your wives? Or why didn't he say you have to go eat grass like he did to Nebuchadnezzar? I got questions, folks. I've got a lot of questions about Jehovah's character here. Nope. He gives David a choice where everyone else gets to pay the price and die, suffering from disease. I mean, does anyone notice that David himself doesn't seem to get the disease and die? Just 70,000 innocent people who didn't, again, commit the grave sin of counting people. 70,000 innocent people get to die, pay the price, because David wanted to count people. I mean, what the hell are we reading here? What are we learning about Jehovah, the God of love? And how does the governing body leverage that? Because I'm getting to it. This isn't just me and my stream of consciousness. David just goes on to live a life of wine, women, and song, while 70,000 innocent people, including children, as seems to be a favorite of Jehovah's, get to die. When they can't answer this stuff on Jehovah's character from the pages of their inspired book, they go to the same old answer they always do. Oh, Stacy, or oh, householder, or whoever I'm studying the Bible with. At the end of the day, just trust in Jehovah. But I've got to tell you, folks, even as a Jehovah's Witness for decades, kid to adult, I'm not feeling the trust here. And by extension, in modern times, this snapshot that Jehovah was sure that we all knew about him and his guy David continues to impact decisions throughout this organization in modern times. Do not fool yourself or deny it. For example, is it not odd that children are in danger in this organization, that pedophiles run rampant in kingdom halls on several continents, that they have a secret database I bring up all the time? But those guys never seem to have the same conversation with Jehovah. I'm going to rank pedophilia and harming child as significantly higher than David wanted to count some guys he got insecure before a battle. I mean, I often wonder if Jehovah did talk to these evil people, harming people in this organization in kingdom halls, what choices would he give those guys? I mean, he gives David a choice between running from enemies, a famine, people get hungry, or disease for counting people. And why do I keep repeating it? Because, folks, this is the snapshot of the character of the God we're all supposed to be drawn to. The God that they published in 2002, draw close to Jehovah, he loves you. But he pulls this kind of shit with innocent people on the earth. But I digress. Do we need to even discuss or wonder at this point what Jehovah was thinking in a couple of these examples? Why David is such a good guy after his own heart? Then again, he really was apparently after his own heart, because they seem to be similar characters. God had killed millions of people by the time he had this convo with David. He'd already been killing people for a long time. So David really was a guy after his own heart. David seemed to think it was perfectly okay that 70,000 men, women, and children died because he counted people, while he just went up to the palace, had some wine, gathered a few wives to himself, and just moved on. Just moved on. High character. Make sure that these stories influence your decisions if you're a Jehovah's Witness. But aside from all that, it's just staggering to look at the suspect character of Jehovah God from the pages of the Bible, from the pages of the literature of the governing body, from the pages of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. I mean, nice multiple choice options there, Jehovah. And then, by the way, to follow through with it, like you could have just said, you've learned a lesson, or you could have gave David a spanking or Lot a spanking, or not killed the people in Sodom. But nah, you follow through. I'll give you that. You're solid. You're solid that way. It isn't any wonder that Jehovah's Witnesses are knocking on the doors of perfect strangers in their neighborhoods on a Saturday and giving them the same message: believe what we believe or die. It all goes back to the suspect character of Jehovah God from the pages of the Bible and the governing body. Now, I could go on and on with other examples, but I think you get the picture. None of this, by the way, seems to resemble, not to this degree at least, the God of the New Testament. And the governing body has found a very half-baked way of trying to make it sound like it does. Same guy. Is it? Is it really? For any of us that have been Jehovah's Witnesses, how would you feel personally arriving at the Kingdom Hall and letting your daughter sit next to Lot? Are you going to let Lot babysit your girls? Can you trust David with your wife out in the car group on Saturday? He might have you killed on the coffee break at Starbucks halfway through the morning because he just has to have your wife. But humor me this. Do I even need to ask what happens to people like Lot and David today in modern times in a congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses? Would we go so far as to call them good association, men of faith, and hold them up as men that we should emulate in terms of character in terms of developing decision making ability? Would we appoint these guys as elders? Maybe I'm the absurd one, considering Joseph Rutherford built them all a mansion in San Diego during the last century, saying they were all going to live together. Bro time. Jehovah has made sure that these guys are held up as men of faith, as high character people, just like himself. But the same Jehovah and his suspect character then disfellowships someone that doesn't agree with 8 guys in upstate New York. So it begs the question, what the hell is going on with Jehovah? What the hell is going on with the governing body? Something here is clearly off on this subject of Jehovah's character. Or is the question, is something off with the character of the governing body? How does Jehovah make decisions? Is the examples that I rambled on about good judgment? Is he still doing this stuff, by the way? Since he is the Alpha and the Omega, he has always been, he is the great creator. Is he still demonstrating this kind of character, this decision? The New Testament teaches us that Jehovah is love, as we see in 1 John. I'm not going to bore everyone, as I've rambled far too long, by reviewing all of his son's comments on love, forgiveness, how we should love each other, our neighbors. He passed out. The Bible gives us example of his son, who his son is noted as probably the most loving figure in most religions, certainly Judean Christian religions. And he came from this God that, has 70,000 people die because David counted some guys. But the same guy came from his father. And we see Jesus forgiving Peter for denying him 3 times. Very serious. But just earlier, Jesus' daddy, Jehovah, whacks Achan and his kids for stealing some clothes and hiding them. Again, I could go on, but they want us to believe this is the same God. So I ask you, why does any of this matter? Stacy, you're just droning on at this point. What is going on with Jehovah's character? Why can't the governing body, his chosen guys in upstate New York, explain any of this? In my opinion, it actually gets worse. Jehovah's poor judgment and undependable behavior leaks into everything Jehovah's Witnesses teach today in 2022. But the governing body continues to go out of their way to promote Jehovah's questionable character and judgment on and on today. No, Jehovah isn't flooding the planet anymore. Angels aren't killing people, and there's no more talking animals, not that I know of, outside of Disney movies. I'm not going to get into universal sovereignty. See a past episode. We covered that in the past. But when it comes to Jehovah's character, this same paradox, this dichotomy exists in how they prop him up today. So let's look at some modern day examples. I've talked about past examples, and there are so many more that the governing body continue to build talks and books around. But look at how this bleeds into a Jehovah's Witness life today. I think one of the most glaring examples is where they preach Jehovah's hand or intervention gets involved and where it doesn't. Remember, he's the God of love, justice, wisdom, and power. And one of the examples they like to prop up that have always made me question Jehovah's suspect character is in matters of things like construction projects, which they're currently pitching at the annual meetings and in their videos and in their district convention videos today. In fact, in a newer video on their website, one of their brothers, one of their men who is in a faraway island, I believe it's in the South Pacific, I can't remember, shares how Jehovah has personally intervened and gotten involved in helping them get, and I quote, 8 yards of concrete and 80 yards of sand to help them build a kingdom hall. I believe it's the island of Yap in Micronesia. So again, Jehovah will make sure that they have 8 yards of concrete and that they have 80 yards of sand, or so the governing body wants you to believe. He will intervene on such things, but he won't do other things, which I'll get to. Now, in this story about the island of the Yap, and I'm certainly getting offline here in a lot of ways and rambling. They In this story, there's two chieftains as they relate on their video. It's on their website. I watched it last night. You can watch it too. They couldn't get any sand to finish this Kingdom Hall project. The chieftains of this island were arguing and wouldn't sell to Jehovah's Witnesses. So what do? Well, overnight, Jehovah, he, a suspect character, decides to cause a typhoon. We've seen this before. Jehovah can control the weather, see flood, Job's kids, and many of these makes the sun stand still for Joshua, all sorts of stuff. He's still doing it, folks. According to the governing body, he causes a typhoon, and voila, the village chiefs call Jehovah's Witnesses after the typhoon because guess what? They've got too much sand. Would you come take it away so you can finish building your Kingdom Hall? Now, listen, if this doesn't make you question Jehovah's character, I don't know what will. Okay? So I'm using this as one example. But in the same convention season, I should add, the governing body features a video of a beautiful little girl. And I guess she's not little. I watched the video several times. I guess she may be in her young 20s, but she doesn't look like that. She looks young because this beautiful girl, just with a big smile, she has cancer. Never mind the character of the governing body on this subject to even prop up a beautiful soul who has terminal cancer. Never mind this. I literally want to punch them. I'm not going to lie. Never mind that they would go to her family and stick a camera in her face. But during this same season of worship, of food at the proper time, the governing body wants us to believe that Jehovah will make sure a typhoon happens and then prop up this little girl who is dying of cancer, where she tells a story that it went into remission, but it's back, and how she just continues to talk about the future. She knows she's going to die, and Jehovah won't save her now, but he will in the future. So in a nutshell, and I didn't explain that as well as I probably could have, Jehovah's Witnesses and the governing body want the world to believe that Jehovah will help get kingdom halls built in modern times, but he won't save a beautiful little girl from cancer. I pause because I go from laughter and absurdity to just literally wanting to clock these guys. This is what they feed the world. And folks, it's nothing new. The way the governing body has painted the character of Jehovah and his suspect decision-making has gone on, as always, for over a century. I want to give you another example of Jehovah intervening in things like getting books published or a kingdom hall built or a magazine article being written, but he won't intervene in the precious lives of his children. One quote, October 2015 study edition, it says this: Jehovah has helped many of his servants cope with personal challenges. For example, Amy struggled when she was assigned to help build a kingdom hall and a missionary home on a small Pacific island. This is a theme, folks. Back to the quote. She says, we stayed in a small hotel, and every day we walked through the flooded streets to the work site. She also had to adjust to local customs, and frequently there was no electricity or water. Amy adds, to make matters worse, I lashed out at one of the sisters working with us. I went home feeling like a failure. In my dark hotel room, I poured my heart out to Jehovah asking for help. When the electricity came back on, Amy picked up a Watchtower magazine with an article on a Gilead graduate program that discussed all the things she was struggling with: new culture, homesickness, new people to get along with. She says, I felt that Jehovah was speaking to me that night. It gave me the motivation to continue in my assignment. End quote. So again, Jehovah's Witnesses and the governing body prop up this character of Jehovah as one that can do all the silly things I opened with: silly isn't even the right word, disgusting, disturbing things, that he can cause a typhoon for a kingdom hall to get enough sand to finish the project. But the same guy won't save a beautiful young girl from dying of cancer. He'll speak to this woman who's building a kingdom hall in the South Pacific and encourage her through a Watchtower article. But he won't save children who desperately need blood to save their life. He'll let them go by the wayside. The entire character of Jehovah comes under a white-hot spotlight. And the governing body teaches us. They use it at every convention. They prop up a kid who might be something as serious as being bullied or as deadly as someone dying of a disease. And they get them to say how amazing Jehovah is and how encouraging he is to them. The same Jehovah that had 70,000 people die of famine who had nothing to do with David. The same one who drowned babies and puppies at the flood. And if you're not left as a Jehovah's Witness at that point, sitting in a kingdom hall with your head spinning and a headache coming on, wondering, who is this God? I really don't know that I have much more to share with you, because none of it makes sense. In another article that I just have to read to show the sick way that the governing body prop up Jehovah's character and point to Jehovah's Witnesses and tell them to emulate this, that they should be encouraged of this. There's an article, and darn it, I didn't write down the reference, but please search for it on their website. It's entitled, Jehovah Gave Us Exactly What We Needed. And as I tend to do, I run the spectrum of laughing and sarcasm into near tears and anger, and this one does it for me. In this experience, under the article, Jehovah Gave Us Exactly What We Needed, in the box, it says this. Mason was diagnosed with cancer at age 7. And for the next 6 years, he courageously fought the disease. Mason had to be hospitalized a number of times during the course of his illness. Yet those who were in his congregation noticed a pattern. Each time Mason was released from the hospital, he was back in the ministry almost immediately. Mason loved to engage in the ministry for as long as his strength would permit. I'm not even trying to be dramatic. My podcast, my personality. 7 years old, dying of cancer. Push the kid out in the ministry. Back to the quote. When Mason died, more than 700 people attended his memorial service, including many of his schoolmates and teachers. One teacher who visited him shortly before his death said that she wanted her children to have the kind of faith that Mason had. She also said that she had not been contacted by Jehovah's Witnesses in the 5 years she had been living in the area. The next day she was contacted, the next day, at her home by the witnesses. The teacher agreed to a congregation meeting to attend. Tori, Mason's mother, says, Jehovah didn't miraculously heal Mason. And sometimes that thought prevented me from seeing how Jehovah was making our way successful. You think, Tori? But the quote, but he was. Jehovah gave us exactly what we needed when we needed it, end quote. So, in an effort to not break down like a bawling idiot, 7-year-old Mason is propped up by the governing body as a courageous example of character because as he was dying of cancer at 7, he didn't go to Disneyland. He didn't take a hike or go watch a waterfall. He didn't go to a petting zoo. Nope, he was out schlepping our books to his neighbors with the message of, do like I'm doing or die. Mason's mother, Tori, seems to reveal that, it seems like maybe my brain was going, this is really something when I read about Jehovah's suspect character or the Jehovah the governing body has painted to me. But, in the end, I came back around. He gave us everything we needed exactly when we needed it. So, if you're wondering why did I drivel on for the last hour on this subject of Jehovah's character, there you have it. It still penetrates the life of a Jehovah's Witness. Jehovah, the same God of the Old Testament, and all that that implies, we are told is very interested and actually gets physically involved, even intervenes in making sure sand and concrete get to a kingdom hall so it can be built. He can answer people about Bible studies. He can make sure the watchtower is printed. He can build world-class publishing empires. He can amass real estate holdings and much more. But he isn't much interested in helping that little girl. He isn't much interested in helping 7-year-old Mason. He wasn't much interested in stopping the Holocaust. But maybe you want something more recent. More than 19,000 Jehovah's Witnesses worldwide succumbed to COVID-19, the pandemic. They closed in-person meetings, conventions were suspended. All of this is on their website, I might add. Their stats, it may have reached upwards of 22,000 now. Originally, it was quoted as 19,000 Jehovah's Witnesses. So while 19,000 precious children were dying here on earth, the earth he made a day and a night for, the plans for the new 242-acre Ramapo mega audiovisual dormitory complex kept right on moving ahead. Same website, same God. The character of Jehovah, as built, preached, and rammed down the throats of millions of Jehovah's Witnesses by the governing body, in this podcast host's opinion, is at best questionable. At worst, he's a psychopathic monster. The Bible and the literature of Jehovah's Witnesses and how they paint God is a cesspool of yo-yo stories about a guy that will initiate multiple genocides on his children. But he loves you. The old George Carlin routine. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. He's going to let, in modern times, his children, his people, his chosen blessed ones who have his Holy Spirit alone, he'll let them die of COVID or any other disease. But he's the same guy who personally saw to miraculous Kingdom Hall construction projects, or that a book got printed, or that Ramapo went full steam ahead for their new television and audio visual complex. The governing body on a weekly basis walks this bizarre, inexplainable tightrope when it comes to Jehovah. He's going to blow this planet up. He's going to burn it all to the ground. He chose those 8 guys to help him do it. He's the same guy that was in the Garden of Eden. Somewhere along the way, he just developed a taste for modern day real estate, construction, and publication empires. All of this I bring out to show the impact and the effect it has on Jehovah's Witnesses today as they delay every decision, as they delay happiness, as they teach their children, as they live a life without joy, or even worse, they make decisions that put people in danger or even die. I could keep going, but what's the point? I've rambled long enough. We could get technical about it, but the truth is this. The governing body has built a character, a profile on Jehovah God of the Bible. They ram it down the throats of witnesses. And it causes Jehovah's Witnesses to live in a world of cognitive dissonance, confusion, and an unclear image of what their God is. Might I say, a fantasy world. It's a scam job as old as time. It's always gone on. In fact, in blunt terms, they've taken a book available to the entire planet, called it their own, made their own version of it, and built all kinds of fantasies surrounding an idea that's been around since man could form a thought. an idea based on a God with a suspect personality, with suspect decision making. They've built it all on the personality of Jehovah God, leaning heavily into the New Testament, taking a few things from the Old Testament, taking a few things from the New Testament, and putting together a profile, a personality. So as I finish out this episode, and it was a long-winded one, I normally apologize, but hey, that's where I'm at on this subject. I shared my thoughts. As I close out, to me, what it came down to, if you're a PMO, a POMO, all those acronyms, just someone who stumbled upon this, just someone who wants to be educated or have insight, it begs one final question. Why the hell would anybody worship or praise a God with such poor judgment? I want to thank everybody for joining me this week. I appreciate all the comments. If I miss you, I apologize. I do my very best with limited time. Thanks for joining this little podcast. I hope you are all well. I hope there's some things that you can take out of this will give you pause or give you time to think or meditate. I am always open to being disagreed with, and please share your own experiences. I want to thank you. Be well over the course of the next week, and I will see you soon.